Good morning, everyone. Happy Sunday and welcome to day 9 of Forever Fest. We've explored so many themes over these past 9 days, whether it's looking after our health and well-being, protecting open spaces, biodiversity, how we manage economy and business, and managing our waste and assets and land development and infrastructure. And I think we've come back so many times to what we as individuals can do, which I think is really positive when we are designing the future, which is today's theme, on how we can build upon all of these different elements, whether it's well-being or managing business or feeling empowered. What can we do as individuals to be a part of designing a more sustainable future for today and indeed many days ahead? And really excited to have Lily here. She manages a social enterprise and called One Small Step. And I think it really is a blend of using technology to create social good, environmental good, good governance practice, and also getting out in the field, getting your hands dirty and making it tangible. And I'm really excited to be hearing from Lily this morning and hearing her perspective on how One Small Step is contributing, especially to this technology orientated way of feeling inspired to be a part of designing a bit more of a sustainable future. So thank you so much for joining us on Sunday morning, Lily, and would love to hear a bit of what's keeping you busy these days.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be here, and hi everybody. What's keeping me busy? Well, I'm working on, the topic of this talk, a mobile app called One Small Step, which is basically a personal sustainability coach. So it's downloadable and it uses behavioural science to make it easy and rewarding for people to reduce their personal carbon footprints through a series of programs and tools that sort of break down decision-making friction and tailor things to suit you.
Wonderful. Well, it's definitely needed, and especially with just empowering people with data, especially around their impact. I think some people really don't understand, if you're driving 20,000 miles, Ks a year, and you're doing a lot of shopping and you've got a couple of houses, your CO2 index is way over the average. And I think we just got to empower people first with the data and then get them to reduce and then hopefully restore some of our shared damage. So really excited to hear about your flow and your program and and how we can all be involved in using this application to both help people hopefully within the greater city of Dandenong Council. There's a lot of employees holding the council together, but just how general citizens can be using these sort of tools to really better understand where they're at. And what are you finding is are people responding to most about what you're creating?
I think what's been really amazing, because we launched the app a year ago, so in May of 2020, what's been really amazing is, it was an ambitious project at the outset. To what extent can we support people to change their behavior? How many people are going to be interested in doing this? And then what's the effect size, because behavioral change is very complex, especially when it's, predominantly driven by an altruistic motivation. People are doing this because they care about the environment and they care about, the future of the world, and we're all on the same page. We're at a sustainability festival. We know why it's important. But the really amazing thing has been the impact so far. So we're well beyond what I'd call proof of concept. We've saved members who have joined have saved the equivalent of about 70,000 trees in a year, just through sort of behavioural changes, sort of switching products, reducing their emissions across sustainability categories, energy, transport, food, the whole shebang, household waste. And the other thing that's been really impactful is also sort of the less direct, but still really important changes, like, shifting customs. So we have a green finance program, and we've had, I think 800 people switch their bank or super fund through that program in the mobile app. And because we have people's sort of income bracket coming in to the app, in the survey, we ask our users to complete it. Conservatively, it looks like people have shifted about $2 million into those green finance institutions from banks that were previously investing in fossil fuel projects. So Yeah, that's pretty amazing for 12 months of work with a very tiny team.
Awesome. And what future? And with Future Super, what other supers are you encouraging people to look towards?
Yeah, so Verve Superannuation is a relatively new fund. They're linked to Future Super. I think they have a very similar portfolio and investment structure. The difference with Verve is they also are looking at gender equality in addition to environmental sustainability in terms of some of their investments. Another really great group, although they're not, their portfolio is not, I think, as good as Future Super is Australian Ethical, and then there's Christian Super, Cruelty Free Super. So there's a few funds. The program sort of walks people through that and gives, there's third party sort of systems like market forces are great, do a lot of really good work assessing the environmental credentials and performance of Australian banks and super funds. So we refer to them and the RIAA, which I think is the Responsible Investment Association of Australia. Yeah. But the program sort of walks people through that and gives you the resources to sort of make sure that it works for you and you can assess that for yourself as well.
I think that's so important because we all have different preferences, and the sustainable development goals, everyone who looks at that will have a couple that really, they draw towards, and it's definitely not a cookie cutter kind of size thing when it comes to pulling on people's right strings to make them feel at place with where they're putting their money. It's definitely important to have a lot of options. And I'm curious, and I know we've got quite a lot of time to share, and if you'd like to do a demo or run through anything, I definitely don't want to take too much time up. Just wanted to ask a quick question with the 70,000 trees. So that's what I manage a charity up here in Far North Queensland. We've actually planted 900 trees as a part of Forever Fest, 100 trees every day. So we've reached 9 days without the internet blowing up. So we planted 900 trees, which is exciting. And when you say 70,000 trees, my rough metric that I understand is one tree lasting 40 years sequesters 1 ton of CO2. So is that a drawdown basis that you've got like a net reduction or of 50 tons or 50,000 tons, or is it actually keeping old growth trees in the ground, or is it the kind of drawdown component of what?
So the carbon equivalency we use, because we're not physically planting trees, it's an emissions reduction calculated by our users self-reporting, firstly on what's their carbon footprint coming into the app, and then the changes they're making and recording them as they go through the programs in the app. So I think that it's sort of 1,500 tons is the actual CO2 equivalent reduction so far, and that's just based on what users have self-reported. And so we use the US EPA's greenhouse gas equivalencies calculator as one of the ways we look at carbon equivalencies, and that's for like trees that are already planted and the emissions they're drawing down through carbon sequestration. So I think what that looks like is it's sort of the emissions you'd have from not cutting down the tree, and what does a fully grown tree pull out of the atmosphere over time. So, and I think it looks at it sort of over a 10-year period. But this is the interesting thing, right, about carbon footprints and how do we make this stuff easy for people to understand. The work I used to do at GetUp, so I worked as their market impact director and running campaigns on renewable energy target, kind of looking at how do we transition our energy sector. And the kind of fixation I've noticed for some people working in kind of carbon emission reduction fields is to get really, really technical. And it's really important that people can understand their impacts. That's such a big barrier to behavior change, is the lack of clarity. But it's also about curating information in a way that supports people to understand the relative benefit of different changes, and kind of having a more general sense of, well, this is how I'm comparing to others. This is what my emissions are roughly made up of. I can see that this is going to be an impactful change, and that's what I should focus on. So I think, there's so much work to do on individual carbon footprint calculation and how that's done. I don't want to get too technical, but it's a really interesting area that, needs further development really, because most of it's been done in universities, taking sort of greenhouse gas accounting data from a national level, and then kind of dividing it down by industry category. And it's not an appropriate system for looking at individual kind of carbon auditing, where life cycle analysis is really much better, life cycle assessment.
I just put Joro Tech on the chat there, but I've got I've had been partnered with them for the last year and a half, and they're using the Poseidon Index to basically do a credit card association that's pretty much to the point of it being per gram association. So if you're buying a steak dinner compared to a salad, they've got the per gram association, and then same with tracking, airplanes, whether it's a first class ticket or an economy ticket, and your miles that you're putting into the gas, and basically it's trying to automate that individual component. And I feel like this is a little easier, to be honest, than managing the scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 of a big liquid asset and all of the supply chain elements. And I feel like that I'm really curious how we can get trustworthy kind of ESG worthy data for companies without having to do like a 6-month audit and kind of people breaking their backs looking through spreadsheets and doing all of this stuff. If you can have a AI super system that can come into your profit and loss statement and be like, and in a couple of sheets and a couple of things can at least give us 70-80% accuracy for what your annual or quarterly emissions look like right now. I think that's
the dream.
Yeah, I really hope that comes quickly, because there's so much. I think it's important to have the focus on the individual, and we really need it now in Australia because we're lagging. But I just don't know how we're going to. I hope that someone really figures out how to do it on the supply chain stuff, because especially scope 3 just seems like it's almost impossible to fully get accurate data on that. And if you want to be net neutral, then net positive, or any sort of emissions target, you need to address the scope 3 and the science-based stuff. The scope 1 and 2 is important, but without that broader supply chain acknowledgement, I feel like, I don't know, it's dangerous, especially if you're dealing with countries that don't have good regulations, and all it takes is one person in your supply chain to not be doing the best, and it can kind of I don't know. What do you think on the difference between
I've prepared a full presentation. I'd love to jump into it if that's okay, just based on the time. But yeah, I agree that this is one of the many challenges of climate change mitigation, is getting accurate data across those different kind of scopes of emissions, and scope 3 is definitely the most challenging. So, all right, I might just share my screen and jump into it. So can everybody see this? Barney, I'm asking you. Yep, great. Thanks, Steph. I think with what Barney and I were just discussing, I can kind of tie it into this presentation. What do I think is the point of personal sustainability in the context of climate change mitigation, and why should we bother? And how does that actually fit when you're looking at system change? And this is something I've spent almost my entire career thinking about and working on. And I'll start just by telling you a little bit about myself and how I came to be doing this. But sort of the point of this presentation really is just to share a little bit about really the intersection between, consumer-focused or user-focused climate technology, what we're doing in terms of applying behavioural science, applied psychology and behavioural economics to support wide-scale uptake of pro-environmental behaviours, and showing how that can impact climate change mitigation at a system level. And then just talking a little bit about the app and what it contains. And there's a link at the end to support anybody that's attending. There's a QR code, and you can see the app that way, and it also gives you some fun stuff for free. So basically, I started One Small Step a couple of years ago because I had been working in political campaigning. My background's law and public policy, and I'd really focused heavily on environmental law, climate change law, and then went into government. Did some time working in, during my university, doing an internship in US Congress, looking at the EPA's greenhouse gas regulations. I also worked for a solar farm for a while as a legal coordinator, and then had spent a lot of time in my early 20s campaigning for Get Up on the carbon tax. And then after my time working in government, came back and was working for Get Up again, running campaigns on clean energy. And I knew that climate change was so important as a social justice issue, the biggest social justice issue of our generation. We all know about the inequity of both the intergenerational inequity, the world that the generation after us are likely to inherit, and also the inequity of the disadvantages and the impacts of climate change by people in poorer communities who have the least responsibility for contributing to the problem. So I was really passionate about it and wanted to spend my sort of time working on it. And my initial approach was top down. What's the simplest way for us, in Australia and then also globally, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? Well, you look at broad scale policies, things like regulating a whole bunch of industries. So the more avoidable emissions, you can create processes and systems to reduce them. Even simple things like putting a scrubber on the top of a smokestack so you don't get as many hydrocarbons emitting from like a cement plant. The obvious stuff, and then economic incentives, taxes, to put a price on carbon. In an economic system, it's really about reducing putting the negative externalities into the system, because climate change is one way you can think about it is a market failure. It costs everybody so much, all of that pollution that's being created, for example, by fossil fuel generators, but they're not being charged for that pollution or the harm that it causes. So it's about bringing the negative externality into the system and actually putting a price on that cost, and having the person or the company generating that cost to society actually having to pay for it. And so I, wholeheartedly support all of those policies. I think they're so important. Obviously we know in Australia that we've really fallen behind the rest of the world, at least at a federal level, in terms of our policies to mitigate climate change, and are doing climate change policies now in a way that is pretty economically ineffective and is going to cost us and the community more over time. Although, hopefully now with President Biden being elected in the US, their re-entry into the Paris Climate Agreement, will see some improvements, some pressure on Australia at a federal level to set more ambitious decarbonisation targets with some policies that are effective in achieving that. Anyway, so that's the big broad context. I was working in at Get Up, and I found that there was this really big gap in the environmental movement. So the big thing is we have really high personal carbon emissions in Australia because we have such high incomes. There's a very strong correlation between high personal carbon footprints and high income. So in countries like Australia, the United States, parts of North America, parts of Europe, the average carbon footprint in Australia per person per year is around 17.5 tonnes. And it needs to be about 2 tonnes per person per year to align with the UN's 2050 goal. And obviously there's a whole range of things that kind of contribute to your carbon footprint, some of which you really don't have control over. But the key thing is we do have control over a lot of it. A lot of it is to do with consumption of resources that we don't need or that are highly emissions intensive. So this slide sort of looks at the potential impact of behaviour change. And it's about 4% of global emissions, assuming we could, with the app, address the full spectrum of people who would be interested in using it. So demographically, that's 18 to 45-year-olds who have a deep interest in climate change. And, that's a really large and growing group of people. And 4% might not seem like much, but the world's global transport emissions on one metric is 14%. So if we solved transport, That's 14% globally. So 4% might not sound like much, but it's actually really significant in terms of potential impact of people taking up pro-environmental behaviours and looking to reduce their footprints. And that's just looking at the people that we think globally would be likely to use this product over time. Anyway, environmental movement, big gap in terms of systems to address pro-environmental behaviour change empirically. There's a big focus on political activation. That's super important. We need to continue that work. But I felt that there were many, many groups, many people working on that. And yet there was, even within the environmental movement, a real lack of literacy and sustainability skills, a lack of understanding of the potential impact of personal behaviour change, and confusion about, well, what am I meant to do and what should I be focusing on, and sort of a sense of overwhelm and disempowerment as well. And when I'd been working in government, I'd come across the Behavioural Insights team in the UK. So they're a government policy unit that use this kind of emerging field of economics, behavioural economics, to support really kind of cost and time effective ways to get people to change their behaviour. So initially they were using, it's sort of just changing communications and design. Hold on, let me just go back here. Where am I? Sorry, just a second. I'm just having trouble moving my slides around. Barney, have you seen if there's am I sort of with my slides here? I'm not able to move anything around. Is that, oh, there we go. All right. I can only go forward, not backwards. Cool. But just to go back to barriers to behavior change, the research we did, there were sort of 3 key ones. And they were really just about cognitive overload. People really struggle with kind of a sense of what am I meant to be working on and why. There's so much I need to do in a given day, just really struggling to integrate it into your lifestyle, these different pro-environmental behaviours, real lack of clarity on impact, which we already spoke about at the start. And the third one was just disempowerment. So people, attempting to make changes, going online, researching how to do stuff, but then finding that, we know now that information only is totally insufficient to support sort of sticky behaviour change. And so, people would be looking at things like, okay, well, I'm going to reduce my food waste, and I'll change up how I'm doing things in the kitchen, and then ultimately might fall off the wagon and then feel a bit guilty and disempowered, and then go through a cycle of going, well, I don't even know if this is actually impactful. There's all of these other companies and politicians not doing enough. I don't want to feel guilty about this. It's not my responsibility. And, that's really, really common as a kind of an emotional cycle. I have it myself. But I think what I'm really excited about with One Small Step is we address those key pain points and really just try to give people a sort of sense of, well, this is how I kind of compare to others. This is where I have the most work to do in terms of my personal footprint. I can see the steps laid out in front of me, what I need to do. It sort of takes the guesswork away, and it reduces that sense of overwhelm and guilt. And it's pretty similar to a fitness style app in that it supports people to reduce their footprints through these sort of tailored programs that really work to break down decision-making friction. And give a sense of self-efficacy. And self-efficacy means, oh, I think I can achieve this. This is actually easier than I thought. I feel like I have the capacity to make these changes. And so really what is the app? How does it work? You kind of go in, we do what's called benchmarking. So the first thing you do is a quiz, answer a series of questions that help us calculate your initial carbon footprint. And also looking at the behaviours you're already taking. So that's taken into account through this sort of personalisation checklist. And then you get to see your initial carbon footprint and your roadmap. So your starting point, how you compare to others, how you compare to the Australian average, and then where do you need to get to, and what can we do in the app through the programs we're offering in terms of complete emission reductions and what's the number there that you can get down to using the app. So rather than sort of saying, here's 200 things you can do, everything under the sun's useful, try everything. When people are really overloaded in terms of the demands on their attention in a given day, which is basically everybody in the population, asking people just to do everything because it's every little bit helps. It's pretty tricky unless you're really motivated. And, you know, I think people attending this talk, you would fall into the category of people who are really motivated, which is great. There's a subset of people a bit further back who are curious about sustainability. They want to do more, but they're not approaching it with deep interest like a hobbyist. So we need to do more to make these changes easier for that group. And that's really about reducing decision-making friction. And so the way that we do that is this structure of programs where in behavioural science, you know, the biggest kind of things you're looking at when you're trying to support people to take a specific action is you make it easy. So you reduce the friction. There's actually so many things people have to think about if they're trying to change a behaviour that's fairly routine. So one of them is just bringing the benefits of the behaviour up front. What is the impact of this behaviour? What are some of the benefits to me and to the environment? How long is this program going to take me? You know, it's 2 hours in total and I can knock it off in a week, you know, and then I've shifted all of my money into a green bank. That sounds pretty great. I feel like that's doable. So it's reducing the decision-making friction, breaking everything down into tiny steps. Again, so that there's less for you to focus on and it's easier for you just to take this sort of incremental progress and getting positive reinforcement as well. And the other piece is, you know, the other cool thing I guess that we're doing is we're continuously experimenting. So, you know, we update the app every fortnight or so. And that's based on analytics, looking at what's effective across different programs. We have a habit coaching tool, which supports people to sort of set reminders to build new habits. The programs themselves also include sort of helping you set up environmental triggers. So things in your environment that actually cue the new desired behavior. An example of that is the Oz Harvest program. We've teamed up with Oz Harvest recently and launched a fight food waste program in the app. And one of the things we get everybody to do sort of straight off the bat is to reorganize their fridge. So, you know, putting an eat now fridge where you can see all of the food that you want to eat, learning how to eat and cook out of your fridge using what you have, prepping shopping lists that support that. But that sort of fridge shelf, which is eye line, really helps cue you so you're not forgetting to eat the food that's about to go off. Another one is sort of the cycling program, you know, helping everybody set up to start cycling a bit more often, putting your cycling clothes kind of over the back of your chair before you go to work and packing your work clothes into your bag and planning your route. Sort of all of the little things that you'd think if you're just going to start cycling and you're saying, I'm going to cycle to work tomorrow. It's actually all of the tiny sort of starter steps to cue that behavior so that when you wake up in the morning, it's much easier for you to do it and you're reducing your own resistance. And these sort of strategies have been used a lot by health and wellness apps with significant effect, which is the thing I think people don't realize. But, you know, meditation apps, health, fitness, nutrition apps, the ones that are doing really well using the empirical evidence to support behavior change, it's been sort of transformational in those sectors. And the cool thing about One Small Step is we're really using a combination of research from randomized controlled trials, human-centered design, and behavioral economics, and applying all of that research into this mobile app user interface to see what's effective, and then continuously improving that quite rapidly over time. So this is the impact that our members have had in 12 months. We launched the app last May. Oh, that's an ugly slide, but you know, this is what I spoke about with Barney. Another really noticeable impact is in programs where we're not just supporting people to reduce their emissions through behavior change alone. It's also about switching products where that's going to materially support users to reduce their emissions. I can come back to the team in the Q&A. And also, you know, onboarding, this is, you know, you go in, you get your roadmap, your carbon quiz. These are the types of programs we have. They're really, really rich and varied, and we're adding to them every month. So we have programs that cover food composting for people who have only an indoor space. So we're tailoring suggestions and programs to actually suit your household setup, your preferences, your location as well. So food composting, setting up a worm farm, looking at sort of food waste behaviors, so learning how to pickle food and preserving food, and looking at how to cook in a way that reduces food waste. So that's just food waste. And then we have programs that support you to sort of start learning about climate-friendly food, plant-rich meals, prepping them, learning recipes. Another program that supports you to start cycling more, getting your bike road ready, learning how to do a sort of a check of a road safety check for your bike, getting the right gear, planning your routes, thinking about when you're going to use your bike instead of your car. In terms of the car emissions, we've also got a partnership with Go Neutral, which encourages people to offset the emissions from their car that they can't reduce during the year. And they have really amazing projects in terms of carbon offsetting in Australia. So reforestation that actually reduce the bushfire risk and improve biodiversity. And then we have programs looking at energy usage. So lots and lots of behaviors in the home, sort of things you can do, including as a renter. So swapping out your light bulbs with LEDs, looking at using natural heating and cooling so you can reduce the need for air conditioning and the use of the heater. Sort of draft proofing your home is another challenge that we have in this program. And then also looking at purchasing. So, green finance is our first program that's sort of looking at switching products, but we'll be adding more over time. And then we also have one for women looking at sort of sustainable menstrual care. So yeah, there's a really wide array of content in there. And most of it is free. So that's another big thing about the app, is that sort of we have tons of free programs, a couple of a premium for $4.99 a month, in total. And then the habit coaching tool, having full access to that is also through the subscription. But I think like a key thing to understand for us is we really wanted the incentive structure to work well. And we needed to make sure that we were financially sustainable. So we only need about 2% of our user base to subscribe to end up financially viable over time. And that assumes we can grow really, really big with a lot of users. But yeah, just to speak again on the methodology behind what we've done, some of those apps there in the corner, Duolingo, Runkeeper, WellTalk use some of these strategies as well. And, we're continuously testing them. So that's what's really cool. It's taking it out of a lab environment or an academic study and actually testing this stuff with real people to see what the effect is in relation to pro-environmental behaviours and the wide array of behaviours that will support both climate change mitigation and greater ecological sustainability. So, that's what we're doing. Our plan at the moment, we've just raised a little bit of money, growing our team, and we're looking to significantly scale our number of members, our number of users this year, in part because we've demonstrated that we have what's called really good retention. So are people coming back and are they using the app? We've got retention now, like at 30 days, it's on par with some of the best lifestyle apps out there, which is really exciting. That and also the effect size in terms of, for our active users, it's about a 10% emission reduction on average from when they first come in. And while that's modest, it's actually a really, really good sort of first 12 months, given how difficult behavior change is. And, I think we're going to be able to get that up significantly. And so this is just, we've had, I think, almost 17,000 downloads in 12 months with no marketing person. And we'll be able to hire a marketing person now. And so we're also planning on launching in the United States within the next 12 months. So we're aiming by the end of 2022 to have 130,000 members, which we think is really doable. and increasing that average emission reduction from 10% up to 20% for users. And it's really significant in terms of the impact. And that's just looking at the assumed emission reductions. It's not looking at all of the flow-on effects in terms of the number of people who will switch to zero waste and circular economy products and services, and to reduce their consumption of products with high embodied emissions as well. So, you know, that's what we're aiming to do. In terms of the feature set of the app, there's so much we want to do with it. A big piece is just around social engagement and also localization. So really working to support people in their area to be able to access the sustainability initiatives near them and to participate in those. We're sort of doing it at a regional and national level, but we'd like it to become much more granular, sort of at the street or neighbourhood level, which is really exciting. And so for everybody that's on the call, and I can send this through as well on the chat, this QR code gives you a free month to the premium subscription, so full access to the habit tool. If you're not interested in the subscription, don't worry about it. There's so much content on the app that's free. It's really important to us and to me that we have a lot of free stuff that materially supports people to reduce their emissions. But, you know, if you're interested, have a look. That'll also just take you straight into being able to download the app and the free app. So yeah, that's for you. And, you know, I'd love to hear your questions and have a chat. And yeah, but the main thing is just have a look at the programs. There'll be something in there that I think you'll find useful. We have a lot of people who are really enthusiastic about sustainability, saying they still get a lot of value from the app, even though they're doing a lot of the stuff that you need to be doing already. Yeah, thanks so much.
Awesome, Lily. Well, thanks for running through that. And it's just nice to see an Australian company doing this. You know, that one I mentioned before is in America, and they haven't, you know, they're not compatible with Australian credit cards yet, and it's just really nice to see a you know, someone domestically really leading this forward. So kudos. And I just was plugging in all of my data bits and all part of the app now, and really liked that it does have that kind of Duolingo gamified feel to it, with all the circles and a different flow chart. So really beautiful job designing that. It looks beautiful on the phone.
Thank you.
And yeah, I mean, what in the Australian market do you think that is a kind of, actually before I ask that, do you think that things like e-commerce and are, because on all the questions I just did, there was the green energy provider, which I've done with Ergon, got the green energy with them, and I agree, the Future Super and the banks, really stoked that you guys are doing that. But how do we address data use? Because, you know, like in 2019, 4.8% of global emissions came from data related services. And by 2040, that's going to be close to 40% of global emissions, which will be bigger than aviation. And I feel like whether it's Spotify or cyber mining or Google Drive, or, you know, the various million things we can do on the internet, and, you know, one phone that you use for an hour, 365 days a year is 1.5 tons of CO2, just with that alone. So how do you think in Australia, with, you know, Telstra and Optus and Vodafone kind of having domination, we can kind of encourage more kind of conversation and awareness on things like e-commerce packaging and phones, and a few of these things that can be a bit rough to transition from?
Yeah, I totally hear you. I mean, I think that there's I think one company in Australia that we're looking into at the moment, that's a sustainable telecom. So,
Good Tel?
Pardon?
Is that Good Tel?
No, not Good Tel. Oh, thank you, Steph. I just saw the message. Yeah, so there's one, I think they're called Belong. We're sort of looking into them at the moment, as you know, because we're really cautious about recommending any group until we've done the due diligence. Like, that's a big part of the app, is doing all of that research so that it's, you know, we still want to support members to do that research as well and sort of show them, oh, well, this is the reference material we've used. Here's what we've done. But also making that easier, because that's a big barrier to shifting. So I like, obviously with, when you're thinking about data and usage of tools like a mobile app, the issue is the energy required to keep all of the servers running. And the cool thing about that is that it is possible to do that through transitioning to renewable energy as a way to keep those servers running. There's a whole bunch of complexity with different uses of energy and the extent to which you have energy spikes. So sometimes that can be the case with servers. You need, from a physics standpoint, scientifically, you need supply and demand to equal each other exactly in order to provide electricity. And then you also need an energy system to manage the heat and maintaining the temperature of servers so they don't overheat. But a lot of that's doable through transitioning to clean energy sources. And then to the extent that it's not possible, or I think it is entirely possible, but to the extent that it's not possible, say, in a transition period and you need to use a rapid kind of tool that allows for those spikes to be addressed before we have that really good optimization in terms of demand management. You can offset for that in the transition period. So I think that there are a range of companies, Google's one of them, that are looking at how to address the energy usage, the energy demand requirements from all of this technology. And there's a gap as well on the consumer side for people who are interested in ensuring that their usage of technology doesn't come with an associated heavy carbon footprint. Yeah, I mean, and the other thing that I don't think this is fully in scope for this conversation, but obviously things like non-fungible tokens, Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, because of the way those systems work, they're extremely energy intensive because you're checking, these little data points millions of times over in order to ensure the validity of that system. So yeah, it's absolutely an area where there needs to be sort of systems to transition as those energy costs become more and more heavy, especially when you think globally about the rise in usage of technology in developing economies.
Agreed, and really just excited that you were pushing people towards. And I think and I'm just checked out Belong's website, and actually looks pretty decent because I only saw a good tell, and looks like they're doing a pretty good job. Let's just hope they're walking the talk with their claims and the neutrality side of things. But yeah, and just really awesome that you are pushing people towards ethical banks and ethical supers and being able to track that transition, because that feels like it's more impactful and more needed than, and not saying that bringing your coffee cup and all of the small behavioral change pieces aren't big impact, because that's where we can get conversation starters and all of the good stuff. But I feel like the banks and the futures and the ethical tele providers, like I haven't seen a platform that like deliberately curates that. So that's really awesome that you're doing that. It's such
I think that one really important mindset shift, and I do think it's a bit of an issue in the environmental movement, is the false binary between individual and collective action. And that's the same in terms of consumer demand. So it can feel like it's nothing when it's just you making different choices. But that was the thing that was shocking to me when I ran those campaigns at GetUp. We were getting people to switch their electricity retailer and to buy green power. And the green power campaign was pretty modest. We had 4,000 people switch to green power, which is this renewables offsetting scheme where you increase the supply of renewables in the grid. It's this sort of federalized scheme. Amazing that it's still running. And the price of it's come down a lot. But basically the emissions from your electricity consumption effectively get offset through additional renewable energy being fed into the grid. So you're effectively sort of pushing out sort of fossil fuel energy generation and offsetting your own emissions through renewable energy generation. And 4,000 people did that campaign in about 4 months when I was running it at GetUp. And the impact was really significant in terms of renewable capacity added to the grid. Just through people's electricity consumption. And I'd been working on this amazing community solar farm that has taken a really long time to get off the ground because of the regulatory hurdles and sort of feed and tariff systems and state government approval. And it took 6 years to get off the ground. And that campaign, the Green Power campaign with 4,000 people, had double the impact in 4 months. So, that was when I went, okay, there's a lack of an understanding at a system level about how powerful just a couple of thousand people acting together can actually be, both in terms of emission reductions and also in terms of increasing the market power of businesses that are decarbonising the economy, of zero carbon and low carbon businesses. And, I think certainly for people who are politically motivated, recognizing that, in a time when the power of the state is increasingly diminished compared to the power of these very large multinational organizations, corporations, being able to organize around shifts in consumption can be really, really powerful. But I think the other thing that I realized working at GetUp is that you have to be really thoughtful about messaging, because it's really easy to fall into a way of speaking about it that alienates people because of their political proclivities, and it turns it into a wedge issue and a sort of, I'm this type of person, I really care about climate change. If you don't vote for this party, then you're a bad person. And, in other countries, it hasn't been as big of a wedge issue. There's a whole range of reasons for that. One is that because of our economy and the mining and energy industries here, and their huge influence. But I do think it's really useful to think about inclusivity and using language that supports people to recognize, why is this important to me and my family? How is this going to benefit me? Why should I care? And not starting from the place of guilt or shame, because that just reinforces status quo behavior psychologically. And I think it's a fine line to tread. You sort of need multiple strategies at once in terms of trying to influence corporate behavior as well. It's a really interesting sort of set of issues in terms of public discourse around this stuff.
And have you had much upkeep getting this into, little diesel truck out there. Are you having much uptake in regards to getting employee networks using your app yet?
So just to be clear, this all of the stuff we've done, it's me full-time, one full-time mobile developer, and 2 part-time staff. So, we're doing a lot with a very small team. And we have to, this is one of the interesting things about, running a climate tech enterprise, is ruthless prioritization, because we have such limited resources. If we try and do too many things at once, we're not going to survive. And actually getting to the point where we're financially viable is really important so that we can have the impact we want, because it matters most at scale, right? So yes, we absolutely want to get into offices and workplaces. I ran a year-long pilot with the City of Sydney called the Better Buildings Cup. It was a web pilot that sort of tested this idea of sort of supporting people at the building and kind of company and individual level, employee level, with suggestions on how they can upgrade the buildings, look at company procurement policies, behaviors at work. And that's really, really important. But I also think it really depends on the workplace. And when you think about the complexity of behavior change in a household unit or a family unit or a social group, when you add a workplace and a workplace culture over the top of that, it's really complex. And I kind of feel that you need to really understand the dynamics at play in the workplace if you're looking to support pro-environmental behavior change in that workplace. And I think a sort of human-centered design or user-centered design approach where you go in and you really map what the dynamics are, the level of buy-in from senior leadership, the level of stress people are dealing with. It's typically what you see with companies changing their policies and behaviors at a company level in a way that is less environmentally damaging. That company is usually performing extremely well on a whole range of other metrics. And they kind of had the bandwidth, and they also have the strategic insight to understand how valuable changing some of their systems will be from a business case standpoint. So yeah, I definitely want to move into that area, but we can scale more effectively through focusing on individuals first. Because of digital advertising, it's so cheap for us to sort of acquire members that way. Whereas going through large companies, what we end up doing is making a lot of changes to the product to support that company rather than to get the outcome, which is to make it really impactful from a carbon footprint reduction standpoint. So yeah, we'll definitely do what's called like a workplace service offering further down the track, but we can't iterate as quickly as we need to if we're managing a range of different corporate partners.
Yeah, it's more just the opportunity. I do a lot of stakeholder engagement with corporates, and I had never had an app that I can recommend, but now I do. So it's more just equipping people like me who are going into airports and other councils and whatever. I can become the or whoever else is helping you. I'm already doing all of the ESG compliance, the kind of the checks, the SWOT analysis, and then you can just kind of have as a part of a resource kit. By the way, these legends are walking the talk. If you want to have a humanized, fun, gamified way of understanding roughly what your personalized impact is and do something about that,
Yeah, and that's something we've done. Like we did a promotion with Atlassian, for example, which is a big software company where just provide, I did a talk and then we provided the app for download to their employees. So it's really more just about resisting the desire to customize the app for really large businesses. And obviously there's a massive threshold question of, we don't want to ever be providing cover for businesses who are not doing enough on corporate social responsibility and their own emissions. There is a risk for us as a business if we partner with groups that go, oh, well, look, we have this employee perk where you have this app and all of our employees are using it, but we haven't changed our procurement policies and we're really energy intensive. And, so there's a question there on really just working with groups where we're really values aligned. Yeah.
But don't you think at the same time we need to prod the mine sites and some of the councils, not Dandenong, they're taking initiative, but some.
Oh yeah, I completely think that we need to do that. It's just a question of working with the groups where they've got their house in order at a company level, before going to the employee level.
So they have that vision, but not necessarily the roadmap to achieve it.
Yeah, it's sort of at a case-by-case basis. And again, like our focus is really reaching individuals and households because that's the fastest way that we can grow and also improve the product most rapidly. So yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. It's been very insightful, and I've downloaded the app, and I'm curious just on the trees, and I don't mean to be a heckler. It's just what I do with associating trees with impact and all of this. And for 3,547 kilograms, which is 3.5 tons, to equal 161 trees, because that's what it says. By completing this program, I could save 3.5 tons. And can you just explain the 161 trees just a little bit more? Because I don't know, maybe linking it to sort of half or a year's worth of driving, or 200,000 Ks of driving, because 161 trees.
I know it's kind of random.
Well, and it's just that's way undervalued. Like 161 trees lasting 25 years can sequester, dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of tons of CO2. So I think it's I don't know. I'm just maybe think of a more kind of human, like an Aussie thing with kind of driving or 6 months worth of food shopping for the average Australian, like trying to link that reduction to a kind of negative impact. Like your savings of 3.5 tons is the equivalent of you driving for half a year or catching a plane down to Sydney and back.
Absolutely. Like that's in our product roadmap. And one of the things we're working on at the moment actually is improving how we show your progress and really demonstrating much more coherently these are the programs we've recommended for you. You can do them in a non-linear way, and this is how this gets your emissions down, and really, really showing, the equivalencies that people are visceral and people can understand. And so, we've got sort of the equivalent of trees planted in there at the moment, but that's something we're working on now. And I just noticed, Chris, your question, what's your next step for one small step? It's funny. So our focus now is really, we still have so much we want to do to improve the app. So how we show your progress, how making sure that there's a much clearer connection between the breakdown of your carbon footprint across those sustainability categories and the suggestions we're kind of showing you, and allowing you to sort of see the progress you're making and share that with your friends. So the social tool we have in the app at the moment is called Teams, but it's quite rudimentary. You can sort of sign up as a group, set a challenge, and sort of complete it together in a week. But we're doing a lot to improve that and to add a sort of social engagement mechanism that really reinforces that desire to take those behaviors. And yeah, just really, really improving how we deliver in terms of clarity on impact. I think that that's kind of the area where we have the biggest room for improvement. And the other piece is just where, I've just raised $750,000, basically because we're at a point now where we have really good retention, and we're ready to really scale in terms of user growth. So we've had 17,000 people or thereabouts download the app in the last 12 months, but we're really, really keen to do a lot more work on kind of growing our people's just awareness that we're out there. Like, I'm doing very little media. We've been just doing like tiny digital ads. So now it's really about doing some work to kind of grow one small step and grow our membership base over the next 12 months. And then also we're looking at launching in the US by the end of the year, because there's about, depending on how you look at it, like at least three times as many people who are very likely to use the product, probably more. It's probably more like between 5 to 10 times as many than in Australia. And, that's just really, we don't need to do much to change the app for the US audience, except changing the content. So culturally, and some of the recommendations and the references and the resourcing we use. So that's about a 4-month job full time to do a content for the US audience. But we think that's really important, and the sooner we get there, the better. Also, from a strategic standpoint, there's not many companies or social enterprises like this coming out of Australia, like what's called direct to consumer. There's a lot of software businesses in Australia that sell to other businesses or to councils or to schools. Very, very few that just are working for the end user. And so the talent and resources and guidance we can get from the US in terms of behavior change focused mobile applications is a lot greater than what we can find in Australia. So that's another reason why we want to have a presence there.
I think it's really awesome that you guys are doing it here, though. And I think Australia is only, 27 million people, but if you can affect 100,000 people amazingly here, I think it's such a big gap, because I've been in North California the last 9 years, and there are quite a lot of kind of the Silicon Valley sort of rocket heads doing similar social enterprise stuff, but this is the first time I've seen anything like this in Australia. So I would definitely encourage 100% go into a million markets. Indonesia needs an app like this, and London and all of it, but I would definitely encourage digging so deep into the Aussie market, because we really need something that is fun, that understands our culture, and that we like diesel trucks, and we like cooking outside on barbecues, and we like recreation, and our connection to the traditional owners, and so many of the things that make the Aussie market truly unique. I see this just doing such a great job engaging and scaling, and definitely 100% committed. If you're comfortable, I'd love to have your link on our website, and through who I'm engaging with our charity work up here, I can 100% plug and play this within a lot of people I'm working with. So,
yeah, that would be wonderful, Barney. Thank you so much. That's a really generous offer, and it would be a huge help.
Yeah, and just excited to make it Aussie, because I think we're don't admit it enough, but we're very nationalists here. You know, we like Australian products, and I think that there's a big gap right now to create something that is as smooth and looks as good as what you made, just really relevant to to people even on Centrelink, and people who are students and people. And I think the student piece is huge. You know, I think that I've engaged 8 schools up here in the last 6 months, and they're hungry and they know how to navigate tech better than most adults, and they really want to see lots of different solutions. And I've got these decks, like a business deck, a student deck, and a lifestyle deck, but being able to have that on their phone without having to click into PDFs and do all of that stuff. So I don't know, I'm really excited by, on a personal front, on one small step, and I just see just a really big gap in the Aussie market, and just educating people. I'm still with ANZ. I'm an environmental charity doing my best, and yet I'm still with ANZ because I don't feel comfortable that our ABN's linked to it, all of the account details, blah, 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 blah. And if that can be smooth and done easily, and I can go to Bendigo, or I can go to a bank that doesn't support coal, and all of these things, I just beyond happy that someone's done this in Australia. So thank you for the hard yakkers with behind the scenes and going that a bit crazy with all of the coding and all of the steps that have got such a finished, slick product. Really, really impressed. So great job.
Thanks. Yeah, I think the nice thing as well is it's going to get better. You know, based on what it is now, we have a lot of ambition about that sort of level of friction and convenience and clarity, and giving you as the user, like, what do you need? What are you trying to do? Making it really easy to find that straight away. And that's the amazing thing about mobile software, is because of its immediacy, we do have really good feedback loops to continuously improve it and reduce that friction over time. And now with the resourcing that we've literally just gotten, we'll have so much more capacity to do that, which will be really cool. I totally agree with you, Chris, by the way. Just wrote perks of COVID. Everyone wants to keep things local and support Aussies doing great things. Yeah, there's a really strong correlation between localism and sort of how much you identify as somebody who cares about the environment and sustainability. And it makes sense. You know, for a range of reasons, it's really good to support local, reducing carbon miles, for example. So, did anyone have any questions before we jump off? Just
could you maybe share your emails just so I can drop you a note?
I'll send that to you privately. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. It was I think it was on the end of the slideshow. I just didn't get it in time. And I sent a few links here with the Looksee farm details there. It's a CSIRO projection modeling, which kind of gives you can basically pick a boundary area, and it has all the different ecosystem types mapped out, and you can basically get a carbon drawdown association, whether it's human induced reforestation, and that's just a really useful thing to do.
Yeah. I will add the team email, if anybody, just putting this into the chat, if anybody has questions later or has feedback on the app, first impressions, we're always really keen for feedback on how we can improve it. So I've just added that to the chat. Oh, thanks. What's been our biggest challenge? So I'd say setting it up in Australia has been really hard. And there's a reason why there aren't groups like this operating in Australia. One is access to capital, to finance. I had to spend a lot of time doing what's called bootstrapping. So, you know, back in 2018, I raised $30,000 through a crowdfunding campaign. I worked for 2 years, not paying myself, had to go through sort of pilots with councils and just getting the funding to actually get to the point where I had a decent proof of concept. Like, software development is really expensive. And, you know, that was really tough. And the other piece was not having a coding background myself. So that was kind of the biggest challenge early, was how do I find the right people to partner with, hire the right people? How do I assess the quality of the tech stack that we're using? Is this going to support us to scale? What about the info architecture? You know, those things, and product management, I've sort of learned on the job. And I managed to get some really amazing advisors about midway through 2019. Brian Rollins from Atlassian, who was the general manager of Jira there. Atlassian is a very big and successful Australian software company. And Jason Serafino, who is a multi-time chief technology officer. And they just really, really helped having the right staff to sort of neutralize the software development kind of piece as an issue. But we sort of had a much slower start than I would have liked, and not as good quality sort of, I guess what you call like lean experimentation, because I was learning how to work with coders and wasn't the best early on at assessing kind of the quality of code, and even just learning how to do things like quality assurance and bug testing, and thinking about how do you get what's called validated learning. So not building something that takes 6 months and then you launch it and it doesn't work. How do you build something that takes a week and test your assumption and then make changes based on that? So that kind of incremental product development was something I learned on the job. But yeah, I'd say that sort of upskill on the technical and product development side was the most challenging. And then second to that was access to financial support. Thank you.
And do you, is this app available in all the other app stores, or is it just Aussie now?
So it's just Australia at the moment, mainly because the content is so specific to Australia at the moment. So we do want to make it, honestly, our desire is to make it available globally, but it's really important that the content suits the audience. A big part of that, again, is like it doesn't work for people when they get generic information. It has to feel like it's suited to them. And so that's partly why we're focusing on Australia, and then we're planning on doing content to support a US release. And then we'd probably be looking to fundraise again midway to late next year in order to really look operationally at how we support a global launch, and thinking about content to support each area geographically. And there's ways we can do that with our membership base, getting their support to crowdsource recommendations and quality assure them. But that's a really big challenge, is if we want to maintain that kind of localization of content and actually improve and increase the level of localization, then that's a big resourcing job. But I think we can do it with a large enough membership base.
Yeah, wonderful. And I think there's so many emerging markets that are leapfrogging a lot of things like that in Nigeria and Kenya and Uganda and all of these Central African countries. They're suddenly having phones. They don't need banks, or they don't need some of the things that we did need, and being able to empower, I think, emerging markets with some of this really fun tech, I think, is really important. And I think just to wrap up conversation, thank you so much again for tuning in on Sunday morning. What's something, and this has all been very hopeful what you've shared, but across the board, what's kind of making you hopeful, whether it's in the Australian market or tech or internationally, or what's something that's kind of keeping you G'd up and pointed in the right direction when it comes to sustainability and all of the things we're talking about?
I know this sounds pretty morose, but COVID as a global crisis is really devastating to so many communities, economically, from a health standpoint, psychological well-being. But what it does do is it forces people to question the ways in which they've been living and what's been working for them and what hasn't. And a principle of behavior change is it's actually really hard to change behavior. If you try and do too many things at once, you're typically not going to succeed. You kind of have to focus on one thing at a time and bed it down. The only time where that doesn't apply is in a personal crisis or a massive life transition point, like having a baby for the first time. And so, we've seen huge shifts in terms of support for and capacity to engage in remote work. Institutions that would never have gotten to remote working this fast, particularly when you look at, say, governments, government departments being forced to go into remote work much sooner than they otherwise would have. It's creating, I think, a time when a lot can change in really positive ways. It's actually the type of time historically where we could massively overhaul certain systems because there is the appetite for it. And there's an attunement to our fragility and our interdependence as a species. And I think people are living that now. That's part of people's lived experience. When you look at the viral aspect of COVID, my behavior as an individual really does affect the whole, and can, and it really matters. And I have a responsibility to act in certain ways to support the community, and trust that that will also keep me safe. I think that that's a mindset that is going to lend itself well to people understanding the inherent benefits of personal sustainability. So I think that's a positive.
I like the mentioning of the fragility piece. I think the climate crisis, climate emergency reality, COVID unfortunately has been like a pre-kindergarten run compared to, senior graduation. And I think being humbled in regards to reminding citizens that they are vulnerable in the eyes of nature and these bigger systems, it's a really hard lesson, but I think COVID's kind of shaken a lot of people up, and losing family or friends and not being able to see people for over a year and a half is not fun and easy by any means, but I think it's been needed to kind of shift the pendulum in the right direction in a way. And yeah, definitely echo that sentiment. And,
the other thing I just try to say, sorry, quickly, because I think it's an interesting point I haven't made yet, is the reducing stigma around mental health and well-being, and thinking about preventative health and how do we take care of ourselves and live rich lives, and show up in our relationships, and sort of there's less stigma around mental health, and a greater issue salience and greater interest in mental well-being, and the importance of human connection. We know how big isolation and how big public health issues are isolation and loneliness. And I think personal sustainability practices like growing your own food, sharing resources within your community, within your neighborhood, so you don't have to all buy one of the same thing, you can kind of share it. Thinking about active modes of transportation because they reduce things like cardiovascular disease, cooking your own food and having fresh, healthy produce, eating lots of plants and vegetables and fruit. All of those things really improve well-being, longevity, physical and mental health. And so I think the other interesting thing from the kind of standpoint of just looking at one small step is actually that a lot of people who are really into health and wellness are starting to realize that sustainability is a component of that. And I think that that's quite exciting in terms of the capacity for really rapid uptake of pro-environmental behaviors, as people starting to cotton on to, oh, this actually makes me feel really good. There are so many co-benefits beyond just, oh, I've improved this and it's helping me do my bit for the environment. That's obviously the driver of that behavior for someone like me, but there's these additional kind of benefits that I think mean that those transitions could happen more quickly than we perhaps realize.
Yeah, it's definitely the time, and I think just making it fun, I really can see the fun in that app that you've created, and it's colorful and it's engaging, and it's like the sustainable development goals. Those 17 modules are not really that fun, really, when you talk about no poverty and life below land and all of these very serious things. But if you color it up and package it and make it accessible, then suddenly it does become something.
Yeah. I'd also say it's not just fun, it's also like meaningful to you. Like, what can you do so that you feel that you have some modicum of influence, like focusing on what you can control and controlling that, I think feels really good.
Yeah. Well, thanks for driving that forward. And I added my email in the chat there, and would love to discuss offline how we can get this more up in far north Queensland and through some of the companies I'm working with, because definitely believe in what you've created and where it's going. So thanks for
so much,
designing a future that's accessible. This is definitely making it more accessible. So appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. And thanks for calling in, and really appreciate your sitting through the full hour. And hope you found it useful. And my email's there in the chat if you have any follow-up questions.
Too easy. Thanks, Lily.
Thanks, guys. Bye.